Hi, I'm Sarah Fry. Welcome to PaTTANpod. In a previous episode, we learned about cultural navigation, this model for providing linguistically and culturally relevant support to English learners and their families. We also learned why the individuals that serve as cultural navigators work so hard to build partnerships and empower the students and their families. Rejoining us today to continue this conversation about cultural navigation, we have Maria Ronneburger and Josh McManus. We're also joined by some new friends, Erin Conahan, Loice Byler, and Mark Sims, to help us understand how cultural navigation is operationalized and really what it looks like as a system. Welcome, everybody. To begin and dig into this system view of cultural navigation, that's a question I believe that Maria gets asked a lot in the field is, okay, I understand what it is, but really, how does it work? Erin, from your perspective as an administrator at the School District of Lancaster, what does it look like? How do you operationalize it?
Sure. Well, thanks for having us. We love to talk about cultural navigation. We feel so blessed as a district that we have this phenomenal resource over the last 7 years. It has evolved quite a bit from when it first started, but from an operational standpoint, what we make sure that all of our cultural navigators have, and that we've done from the beginning, is really integrate the navigators as staff in our district. So it's the little things. They have badges, they have email access, they have full access into our student information system. Those logistics that we give our employees, we wanted to ensure that our navigators have the same ability. And it also creates a circle of trust with our partnership. So our navigators are really embedded in the buildings. They, 7 years ago when it started, it was sort of like a secret in the district. I mean, they were housed at one building, and there was 1 or 2 buildings that were really utilizing this service. And Josh and I would go to principal meetings, and we would talk about the service, trying to get more buildings to be aware of it and utilize it. But then once the secret got out, it just really spiraled in a good way. And then more navigators came on board. We were able to offer more languages. So the way it works now is that the cultural navigators are really embedded in the buildings. Like I said, they have that district level access. And we have changed it to somebody just would contact a navigator, and we would start getting people services, to now it's more formalized. So the navigators, there's a streamlined application, so to speak, where it's a referral process, and it's embedded into the MTSS teams that we have. So somebody on the IU side kind of manages that process, does an inventory. We use Smartsheet. That's what works for us. So then we're just able to track it as well, and the time, and if we do say no, capturing the reasons why. And then the MTSS teams identify who has a need and then completes the Smartsheet form, and it gets sent to the IU. They process it through their end, and then they start providing services. Something else we've added is there's a touch point through our enrollment system. So when families enroll in the district, and if they need language testing or anything else, they can make referrals that way as well. And navigators in the past, sometimes they come with families to enroll, or resettlement agencies will come to enrollment as well. And we're able to really just plug people in from the get-go. Another way that we've really operationalized it is through welcoming schools, which I think is probably the most phenomenal opportunity that we're able to provide, is that not only for the families that have a different educational experience, but it allows the navigators to meet with the building teachers and administrators alongside that family and really share firsthand how the education system works, what the family has experienced previously, what they'll get here, and it allows the administrators and the teachers to really welcome them into the building and kind of start that relationship.
Thanks, Erin. I calling back to previous conversations that we've had with our cultural navigators, something that was inspiring was that many cultural navigators, before the term existed, were doing this in the community, kind of offering this just personalized support. So it's interesting to hear you talk about how it grew from maybe this informal process into literally a component of your MTSS programming and structures. So, recognizing that effort and that interest and that passion from our cultural navigators, but putting it into a system to ensure that families and students that need these services are able to receive them. And it's something that you said that also kind of stood out to me was that not only is it embedded in that MTSS process, but literally from the enrollment, at the time of enrollment, you're capturing that information and data and reacting to it as needed. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. And I would say that, pre-pandemic, that was not necessarily the case. I think we were slowly working towards it, but, the pandemic, there were some benefits that came out of it, which, really shifted how we do business, right? And I do not think with the rate, especially in the beginning, like that, early spring of 2020, the information was changing so rapidly. We knew we were missing out and that families were not getting it. And so we were able to engage the navigators very quickly and make sure that the communications really made sense for the families that we were using, that we were using the right kind of language, and having those nuances of, no, don't say this instead, but we didn't know that. So that would have been a disaster, I think, otherwise for us. So having the navigators there, and then because of that, we were meeting once a week with the navigators. Now we meet every kind of 3 or 4 weeks, and it's just really a touch point of our overall communication practices as a district. What are we missing? What are the navigators hearing? Where there's a disconnect, and it's so beneficial, not only for us, obviously for our families, and I think the IU13 as well, but it's a wonderful relationship.
And you'll have to forgive me. I've been learning more about cultural navigation, and I'm just so excited about it. For our audience members that may not have had the opportunity to view or listen to that previous episode with our cultural navigators, we did hear some very personal stories about why it matters and why it's effective in our schools, in our districts. But I'd like to circle back on that in this episode. From your perspectives as administrators, we've got Loice on here, who is a cultural navigator, and then our previous guests, Maria and Josh, just to kind of frame it out before we even dig deeper into let's make this happen. Why is it a part of your systems? Why is it such a crucial offering, not only with MTSS, but just your entire district planning? Why do you use cultural navigation?
Well, why not? I think it's probably a better question. For us, we have so many languages and families that are resettling here or migrating here. We're doing a disservice, and it's not fair to them, and we're not setting anybody up for success if we don't do it. So it makes things easier for us. It allows us to build better relationships with families and the partners in the community. And it allows the students and the families to be more successful. And especially folks that have had incredible journeys here to Pennsylvania, and then to just throw them in this education system, you need a safety net. And I really think that's what navigation service is.
I could speak from the building level to say we were able to identify gaps in needs of families and students that we identified that we couldn't address without this level of support. So without it, I can clearly say that those gaps would have remained and existed, and students wouldn't have, and families wouldn't have benefited from all that schools in our district had to offer without this sort of bridge through the cultural navigation.
And I would add to that, the why. On the 2020 census in the state of Pennsylvania, 1 out of 7 individuals indicated that they speak an additional language or a language other than English. So when we think in our school systems, we think of English learners, but we really need to broaden that and understand that most of our school districts are experiencing demographics that are changing, and they include multilingual learners and families. So as Mark and Erin have shared, in order to really shift our systems to be culturally and linguistically responsive, these are things that we must do. And we need to move the needle and understand that education is a multilingual experience. It's going to have to be as we move into the future.
Maria, thanks for kind of positioning that. And I think maybe that raises another question on my side is, we've heard these personal stories and the importance of cultural navigation for the students and their families, right, at that level. But I'm wondering if our guests today can share some perspective on the impacts that cultural navigation has on the overall school community, outside of one student and their family, that relationship with their teacher, their navigator. What does that, are there ripple effects? What does it mean for an entire school or district?
Sarah, I would like to go back to your question. I didn't speak fast enough.
Sure.
And I think what Erin and Mark get right is that when people move, they bring culture with them. They bring language with them. They bring traditions with them. There is a Swahili saying that says, "Mwachamila ni mtumwa," that the person who lives their tradition and culture becomes a slave or is a slave. So when people move and come into communities, for them not to be enslaved by the new culture, for them to retain their traditions and cultures, cultural navigation comes in. Because as a Swahili speaker, an African woman, I can walk into a space. Both Maria and I can walk into a space. Maria loves the kids, she loves the families, but I can see and hear things that she doesn't because of culture. So doing cultural navigation is more than interpreting. It's just being aware of what is going on in a person's head that is from another culture, in their heart, in their traditions, to support them that way and to bring the school system into that culture and help administrators understand what is going on in a person. I can give an example of that. There was a time, we have wonderful teachers in the school district. When it was during COVID, the students had to log in on their iPads. And this teacher noticed that his student wasn't logging in and he was losing her. And in his desire to help her succeed, he called me. He said, "I'm going to go to the house. And when I get there, I'll call you and you can help me." So he walks over to the house, calls me, and I turn my video on, and he's standing outside the door. And the student comes in and the mama comes to the door. So he starts helping the student how to log in, and he wants mom also to learn. And in that moment, I heard her say under her breath, in Swahili, "Why won't he come in my house?" The teacher is over here doing what he needs to do. And I said, "Hold on a second." So I went to the mom and addressed that, because in our cultures, when you come to my door, whether there's COVID or not, you come in the house. You don't stand outside. So this mom was thinking, why did the teacher refuse to come in my house? Are we dirty? That's where minds go. Are we dirty? Are we so undeserving of his presence? because in these cultures, teachers are thought as higher than presidents, because the teacher educates the whole community, the president, the doctors, you name it, they all go through the hand of the teacher. So the mom is thinking that. So I stopped the teacher and I went to address mom's issue. And I said to her, I said, right now, because of COVID, teachers have been asked not to go into homes. And he came all the way here to help your daughter. Is it okay if you land with your daughter out here? She said, oh. And so that day, mom and daughter were able to be successful. Both of them learned how to log in because there was a cultural navigator present. And I could hear and understand her mind, and I could also assist in language. So all I'm saying is the school districts that have cultural navigators, Swahili speakers, Arabic, French, whatever is needed, it's more than just language. It's culture, reading what is going on.
Loice, thank you so much for sharing that story and giving that perspective. It's what you led off with was, we have wonderful teachers, but going back to what Mark and Erin said is that they can't do it themselves. Without cultural navigation, there will continue to be gaps and unmet needs. And I think that your story speaks to that. A great teacher with high quality instructional practices may still lack, right, that knowledge base and that experience to help a student and a family really access the services and engage at a great level. So I think that story really paints that picture of it does need to be a partnership. It needs to be this community effort. And there are folks that have skill sets and have backgrounds and experiences that really empower the entire community. So thank you for that. I'd also like to, before we kind of get back into this broader conversation, something that you also mentioned that really spoke to me and came back to this idea of cultural navigation as a systemic process as part of NTSS is, I can't repeat it because I don't know the language, but the quote or the saying in Swahili that you gave just reminded me of the fact that cultural navigation is not a nice to have or something just to kind of put out there as an extracurricular. It is a social justice practice, and it is a necessary tool and system to ensure that our students and families have equitable access to education. And I think that's so important to remember in these conversations. And it even goes back to Erin's, remark that why wouldn't we do this? It is that important. So thank you.
Yeah, it's so much more than like translation and interpretation. Like good. I think 7 years ago, yes, it was like, oh my gosh, great. We have these people that can provide translation and interpretation. But this is about relationships, and we cannot be good educators and good education systems if we do not have relationships with students and families, period. And cultural navigators are critical for building relationships because, as you said, they have different experiences than we have. And it allows us to build relationships with the navigators with the families. It opens the door then for the families to build relationships with the education system. And it's a gift.
And furthermore, I would add Loice and how articulate that she laid it out perfectly in understanding, there's the buzz terms in education is culturally responsive. And what we heard from Loice is the true understanding. I get the question all the time is, what does it truly mean? And Loice was able to show us that language is culture and culture is language. You can't take one without the other. And in order to have cultural responsive practices through a system all the way down to instructional practices, as you mentioned, Sarah, it must include the knowledge. Now, you cannot know every culture, you cannot know every language, but understanding that the language that we use and the culture that we're from informs the way that we approach things. And we cannot go at it with this is right and this is wrong. And cultural navigation bridges that gap. And I just thank Loice for sharing that with us, so that illustration, so we could just see that beautifully laid out.
So using that example, and there's so many more, I would encourage our audience members to revisit the other episode to hear these anecdotes and these powerful moments that cultural navigators have literally navigated with students and families. I'll again raise the question, though, to help our audience understand that the impacts go beyond those individual moments, and it goes beyond even that student and their family. How does cultural navigation impact the entire school and district community, even those students that are not involved in it, or the educators, the staff? What are the impacts, and I would hope the benefits of having this system?
I think that I can speak from that, again, from the school perspective. I think for Edward Hand in Southeast Middle School, as it's now identified as Hazel I. Jackson, but Edward Hand in Southeast at the time, I think that the school was set up for success with the establishment of the Memorandum of Understanding between the IU and the Refugee Center and the school. On one of our early release Wednesday professional development days, they were able to come and help our school understand what the service was going to look like, who the families were that they were going to serve, and what their journeys were, whether they came from Africa or Burma or Nepal or Russia, the Caribbean, wherever they were coming from, like what their cultural traditions were, what their belief systems were, what some of the needs are, and overall just best practice approaches for supporting those families. So we didn't go into this relationship blind, and the teachers and the staff had a really good understanding of the why and the how and what it was going to look like. So that just eventually, to answer your question, actually helped us find ways to incorporate those new families and cultures into our school system, and they became a part of our school family, because this was new for all of us, and especially our students. But I believe that original introduction of what the service was going to look like just was immeasurable on how it allowed the relationship to take off and eventually impact all of our students and families.
We've also had opportunities where our cultural navigators provide professional development, not only to the buildings, as Mark said, but district-wide, which has been a huge resource. Again, not only talking just about what navigation is, but just their own lived experiences and the different cultures of families and students that are arriving here, and things to do or things not to do, and how you can be offensive and you're not trying to be, but like you need to know these things. And so that's been just again another resource that our staff and administrators in the district have been really able to benefit from.
I would like to give an example of that, how it has impacted other students in school. So one day the school counselor invited me to a meeting because there was an English learner who was being bullied by other students. So I went into the setting and listened, and I realized that what to call non-English learners, or I don't know what title to give them, but the students who grew up here did not quite understand how it would feel to go to another country. So what I did was I created a PowerPoint and I took them to China, imaginary. I said, so here you are, your mom doesn't know the language, you don't know the language, and you don't know how to navigate at school. So I walked them through this whole experience, and I brought in another character who knew the language and how she met them at the grocery store, helped them purchase the food they needed because everything was in Chinese. And so we played this scene out with them, and I said how they went to school, and there was the same girl, how much she helped them. And this was a female fight going on. So when I finished, I said, well, so this student, is in the same position like you are when you went to school. How can you help her? And they started crying. And the girls started crying, the ones who had been doing the bullying. And we talked about it. We finished. I said, now you two, I would like for you to be her best friend and walk her home so nobody else ever bullies her. And that's what happened. So I think, and there was such a beautiful relationship with those three girls. So it is kind of like sometimes, I know even for me, there are things I don't understand, and there's a lot that students don't understand about each other, but it's bringing them together into each other's space, and saying, this is how it is for this student, how would you like to help her thrive and succeed in the school?
Oh, Loice, you're just going to melt hearts with this episode. Maria, Josh, I know in our previous conversations, we've discussed this too, the fact that when we're talking about cultural navigation as a system, we do need to kind of pull back the spotlight and pull it away from just we're helping this student and their family, right? We were using words in our previous conversations, not just this help, but this empower and this engage, right? And this involvement, so that it's not this one-way system. And Loice's example, I apologize, Loice's example with those students paints that picture for us. But I'm wondering, from your perspectives or experiences, are there other ways that you would explain that this really does impact everybody in that school and district when cultural navigation is at play?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in reflecting upon Lois's words and what Erin and Mark have shared today, is that we're really looking with cultural navigation to move the needle at the school level and at the family level. So we are tracking individual goals for students and the parents and guardians, and we want those goals to be meaningful to the student and to the school at the same time. And so that's one way to know that we are empowering individuals. And we're also, and we're lucky because we work with individuals like Erin and Mark who understand the need and the importance of diverse learners having equal access to education and communication as someone who, was born in the United States and speaks English as their first language. But moving systems and influencing systems as a partnership together are really what has made this work within School District of Lancaster and IU13's Refugee Center, is the district openness to learning as well as our openness to learning. And so that collaboration piece is essential in moving those larger systems. I'll give one example. Loice had a group of Swahili-speaking community leaders who she mobilized, and the former superintendent of School District of Lancaster met with. That's a really interesting example of parents and guardians from School District of Lancaster being able to have an opportunity to share their insight directly with the superintendent. And what that means when you have community groups of leaders of parents who are able to feel valued, trusted by meeting with a high level district official, that can be positive for all kinds of different learners when there are increased communications between the decision makers at a district and the parents and guardians. And so I would say that that's one area where increased communication systems, feedback systems that a district's developing, like School District of Lancaster, impact not just English learners, but others as well.
And these conversations trickle all the way down to the teachers that are the boots on the ground. The decisions that Josh, just told us of a superintendent meeting with a group of parents, and then administrators, principals like Mark, making decisions for his team to have cultural navigation in the building and really making sure that it's a part of the full system. It's support for teachers. And now more than ever, as we see teachers exiting the classroom, we're looking for resources on how we can not just empower our families and our students, but our teachers. And we heard Loice talk about how many times parents coming from other cultures, they highly, highly value teachers and the profession of teaching. And when they come to our culture and they're learning about our school systems, for a principal to have cultural navigation in place already is communicating to the families that they serve and the teachers in which he is leading or she is leading, that this is a vital role that we uphold, and we're here to support every player involved. And so I can't say enough about there's just a ripple effect with having cultural navigation be a part of, if you have an MTSS framework in place, when you have IEP teams, not just bringing them in. I think Josh said it's not an afterthought, or Sarah, you said it, but it is an integral part that is a mainstay. It's always there. We've talked about in the past, if you have Check and Connect, we think of that as a tier 2 or a tier 3. Well, we heard Erin and we heard Mark talking about that all of this needs to be tied to evidence-based, qualitative and quantitative processes that have purpose and design to improve their student outcomes. And they've been efficient and they've been effective. And they've talked about they've given specific examples on how to do that. So we know that just from hearing from them, that this has to be a creative, strategic problem solving with all the players at the table. And so cultural navigation is just one of those players at the table.
So we've heard, I hope everybody's had an opportunity to kind of share that perspective or really emphasize the myriad impacts we discussed as kind of this ripple, right, outward from that one maybe relationship with one student and their family. Coming back to that systems level, Erin, you mentioned how cultural navigation has evolved over the years, and now there are systems in place for professional development to introduce all of the teachers to it, or making sure that the referral process is there's a procedure in place within the technology systems. I'm wondering, to kind of close out our conversation today, coming back to that original question at the heart of everything. We know that cultural navigation is important. It's critical. It's valuable. How do we operationalize it? So I'm going to pose that question to the entire group from your perspectives. What wisdom can you share for ways to introduce it or to help make it effective as a system? What advice would you give others about operationalizing it?
Sure. Yeah. So I think you have to have trust to do this. And because you're giving an outside group access to like your full student information system, right? Not just like attendance, but like all the things, and allowing navigators to also input into the system, which typically does not happen if you're not a district employee. And even then you have closed access, right? But it's also about funding, because like, who's going to pay for this? And so we have a phenomenal relationship with the IU13 over the years that we've written grants together, some successful, some not, but we keep trying. We have really transparent conversations about what their needs are, what do we need to like move around? How do we access some different dollars, either locally or at the state or federally? When we hear about things, we're always trying to come together, like how can we expand things? And so you have to have trust to be able to have those really transparent conversations. And I would say too, I mean, it is simple, but like embedding the individual navigators into building level teams. If they're not seen, like we want them to have School District of Lancaster badges. We don't want them to wear their IU13 badges, selfishly. We want the building and the students and the families to see like we're one unit and not just this provider that does this thing out here, but we're really integrated. And that takes time to get there. That doesn't happen overnight. So like when it started 7 years ago, I was like, hey, let's try this thing and see what happens. But now it's very seamless. And when there are problems that arise, which it is inevitable, we're able to all come to the table to figure out what do we need to do, how do we need to pivot, what do we need to adjust on, because we have the same end game, which is students and families, right? We want them to be successful. So,
and I think if I were to make a recommendation, it would be for other schools and districts to a la carte the contract. And what I mean by that is I go back to Maria's identification of qualitative and quantitative data. So what actually are the needs? What are the services and what are the hours that we think that this is going to require, and tailor the contract specifically towards those needs. And I think that worked out wonderfully for us. And I think that one of the things that we discovered was sometimes we were short hours, sometimes we needed more hours. And Erin talks about the budget piece of it and kind of create that buffer for the availability. It's easier to pull back than it is to add. So add more hours into the contract and the budget. And I guess what you didn't ask for is my shameless plug. Because I love the Refugee Center and I love the navigational services. And I recently reconnected with Josh and Maria. And then to see Loice on the screen, who was the navigator in my building, it just takes me back to a wonderful, warm, filling place. And it was just a pleasure to be here today. And there's my shameless plug.
Loice, you have been, the kind of the shining light in this conversation, as others have already said. Your perspective is unique, right? You are on the ground. You are in the school building. If someone ran into you and was like, hey, I'm going to try to do this cultural navigation thing in my building, I'm a school principal, what should I do? What should I keep in mind? What advice would you give them?
I think it would be important for them probably to watch this PaTTAN podcast that are already out for them to understand what cultural navigation is. I would also encourage them to talk to Erin, Mark, Maria, Josh, and get more insight into what cultural navigation is. If they had time, I could continue to talk to them about cultural navigation and what results we have seen and the impact that cultural navigation has had in helping families thrive in Lancaster City. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the issue that Erin just talked about trust. That is a big, big thing. So a couple of times the school district sent out communication that was translated into Swahili. They would usually send me the Swahili communication and the English so I would understand it. So this one time, I see a message coming in and it says the late and the teacher's name. Okay, in Swahili, that's what it said, marehemu, which means the person who passed away, and the teacher's name is, who died? So I open it and the communication was, if you have late assignments for this teacher, you need to get them in. But the Google translated and put marehemu, which means the dead person. So I quickly called Adam and say, Adam, pull it. And that's where trust comes in, that he trusted me and could pull it. Another time it was a date thing. So the way we do dates is we start, the sunrise is always at 6. So the first hour after sunrise is the first hour. So we say 1. So when here in English, we are saying 7 a.m., we are saying 1. Does that make sense? And then the second hour is 2, and you're saying 8. So we go that way. So this communication was sent out, and I got it in English. When Google translated, everybody was supposed to meet at 11 a.m. Okay, Google translated, same. So it says saa kumi na moja, 11 a.m. In Swahili, that is 5 a.m. So again, I was, pull that, let's work on it. So they're just little things like that that would be missed without the trust. Just sending that to us and us calling back, whether it's me or Jalila or Taylor or whoever is doing this, calling back and saying, let's not send that one out. So just things like that truly work well when we all work together. It has been my pleasure to work with Erin and Mr. Sims at Jackson, Maria, and my very favorite supervisor, Josh.
I think that Loice is saying something that could be very easily underlooked. In her story with the translation problem, she mentioned reaching out to Adam. Adam Orem is the Director of Communications in the School District of Lancaster. Loice had a direct line to the Director of Communications in the School District of Lancaster to prevent a miscommunication and becoming a big confusion. I mean, I guess my point is, this started with the word trust. And we trusted the fact that the relationship and the service that Loice provides gives her direct access to the Director of Communications in the School District of Lancaster. That is like huge. It's so important that she could have that line of communication with that person at that level and the way that they reach families.
Wow. Yeah. To hear you say that and to just emphasize that, that's been a thread throughout our entire conversation today, is that, right, the cultural navigators within the School District of Lancaster are valued, right? They're not these just external contractors or people coming in. They are a part of the system. They are a part of that community. Maria and Josh, you've gotten some kudos from across the board. I hope you're feeling pretty good about yourself. But to close us out today, are there any other bits of wisdom or resources that you'd like to mention before we end our discussion?
I think I would like to say what's been underscored here is that although School District of Lancaster, as far as amount of English learners they do service, which is in excess of 2,000, you may be listening to this and thinking, well, we're not a school that's nearly that size. The fact that you've heard about this trust and this partnership that exists between the IU13 and the School District of Lancaster, that's the key. No matter if you're a school that services 10 or you're a school that services 3,500. Again, I cannot emphasize enough, it's not just the amount of English learners that you have in your district, it's considering your entire community and knowing who your community is. And here in this podcast today, we heard from a part of what makes up the community in Lancaster. And that's this partnership between a school district, a partnership between the IU through PaTTAN, and there's many other players that you heard about and some that you haven't even seen. And so that's really what it is. It's this collaborative effort. So I think that to learn more, to reach out to PaTTAN or the IU13, because really, Gaining that trust is through working with a quality organization that has done it and knows what they're doing, and that would be the Refugee Center at the IU13. So we want more opportunities for IUs and districts to be able to hear from them, learn from what they've done, as we heard from the School District of Lancaster, learn from how they've used cultural navigation for the past 7 years, and just let that spread throughout the state.
And on my end, I really don't have anything to add. I just want to say a sincere thank you to everyone for joining this call. And honestly, it really is a model that has grown out of a partnership. We would not have been able to create the model that we have today if it weren't for School District of Lancaster, if it weren't for a collaborative relationship where we are learning and growing together. So thank you.
So on that note, I know that we'll share some links in the show notes for our audience members to learn more about cultural navigation and get in touch with Josh and Maria to have deeper conversations and receive support in pursuing establishing the system elsewhere across the Commonwealth. I'd like to again thank all of our guests today, Maria, Josh, Erin, Loice, and Mark. Your experience and wisdom are so valuable, and I'm sure that folks will be enjoying this episode, but will take a lot with them out of it. I'd also like to thank our producer today, John Ragsdale, and our audience, of course. Viewers and listeners, please don't forget to circle back to the previous episode about cultural navigation, check out the links in the show notes, and come back to PaTTANpod and find a different episode very soon. Thank you.